Well, tēnā koutou katoa. No ototahi toku kainga inai nei, e roia toku tangia mahi o Perryfield Lawyers, ko Stephen mo toku ingoa, no reira ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. It's so wonderful to see all of your faces here on the Zoom and know that you've come, made some time in your day to have a discussion, listen in on a conversation that Jenny, Craig, and I are going to have. We're really looking forward to this. We welcome your questions, your comments, put them in the chat, and we will make sure we get to as many as we possibly can. But one of the things that we want to do is open this with a karakia. And I think that one of the unique things about this sector and the people on this call is that we have an intergenerational perspective. And so I have a very special guest with us today to lead us in a karakia. And I think you'll see why this is important, thinking of the next generation, what's coming. So I'd like to ask Isaac Mo to lead us in our karakia. Isaac, can you come and stand here? There we go. And just read that out.
Kia tau, kia a tātou, ki rite, what,
Kato.
oh, ki rite tātou, ki u tātou, ki whakaro nui, ki a tātou, ki mana
Nui.
mana wai nui, ki whaka, whakaute, ki a tātou, Māori ora ki te whare turi tu, tu, turu whakamauru kia tina mia hui taikia.
Thank you, Isaac. We appreciate that. So what we're going to do in this session is that I'm going to hand over to Jenny, and then Craig is going to speak, and then I'm going to speak. It's going to be a little bit of passing the ball back and forth. So I'll hand it over to you, Jenny, and you can get us started. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, kia ora, everybody. Wonderful to be here. And thank you, Isaac, for that karakia. That's such a lovely way to begin our hour of kōrero. I want to call out to everybody who's on the call. It's so lovely to see you. There's a number of familiar faces that I can see and names, you know who you are, people I've worked with in various jobs over the last few decades, a few neighbours from the same street. So lovely to see so many of you. What are our numbers, Stephen?
It looks like we're about 150 now, so people are continuing to join. Yep.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. Just a reminder, we won't be taking any verbal questions, but please put questions and comments into the chat, and Stephen, Craig, and I will coordinate our responses to them. I'll ask Stephen and Craig to introduce themselves to you in a minute for those of you who haven't met the three of us before, but I think this is the third of the webinars that we've been holding this year, and certainly the response has been huge. And I do want to shout out to Craig and Stephen, because I think that the work that you two are doing has really had a really significant impact on the progress that we've made with this issue. So some of you, I think, will be aware that the whole issue around the taxation of charities probably took the sector a bit by surprise. And I think the fact that the sector has responded so strongly has been a real tribute to us as a group of people who, as a whānau, who are able to come together and work together and come up with a consistent response to the issue. So just a very quick reminder before I hand over to my colleagues, but there was a call there was an issues paper and a consultation process that was started earlier in the year, and then Minister Willis made an announcement that basically said that while the government had been investing in changing the way charities are taxed so that businesses that operate as charities are treated like businesses and pay tax, she confirmed prior to the budget that no changes would be coming at this budget, in the May budget, because we're continuing to work on the area. So the minister went on to say, we had a short, sharp consultation with the charity sector, and that has thrown up two key things. That is, the potential revenue the government would get from this is pretty small, at the most 50 million a year. So it's not essential to our budget that we hurry these changes through. And what officials have advised is the consultation has uncovered a lot of complexity about definitions and rules and how charities would react in practice, Willis said. This could mean that changes are coming in future, but not at the current budget. I want to work this through fairly. I'm very committed to making sure we've got a fair system with high integrity. We won't be making changes in this space, but I don't want to rush it and get it wrong. So that's kind of where we are now. And what we wanted to do today was pick up on the issue where we are now, what we understand about what will be happening next, and what it is that we think we can do as a sector in response when the time is right. So I think, Craig, with that introduction, I'll pass over to you. So if you could briefly introduce yourself and then kick the discussion off.
Thanks, Jenny. Kia ora tātou e te whānau. Craig Fisher. I am a former audit partner, former standard setter for accounting and audit standards, someone who's been on boards and involved in the charity sector for a long time. And these days I spend most of my time sitting on boards or doing a bit of board governance. This issue has exercised me quite a lot. Largely because I've been very concerned about the policy underpinnings of it. We need to make sure that any changes that we make that affect anything that we do in the country have really good, fundamental, sound policy underpinnings. And I've sort of struggled a little bit with this one. But firstly, I'd just like to congratulate everyone in terms of all of those of you that have got involved and made submissions. Firstly, what we did following the announcement by Minister Willis that Jenny's given us a quick summary of there was we got back in contact with the IRD policy team, who I have to say are a good bunch of people trying to do good work, but they sometimes are caught between a rock and a hard place in terms of what their masters say. And they told us that we actually set a record as a sector for the most downloaded issues paper the IRD has ever had at 7,000 downloads. So they thought that was pretty impressive. They don't normally get that much interest in their downloads. So well done, all of you folk. And then I think, the downloads is one thing, but to me, the fact that we got over 900 submissions as a collective sector out there is absolutely wonderful. So, our voice has been heard, and it has pointed out the challenges, which is really good. I'd also note from the IRD policy team that they are very appreciative of getting some good, well thought through submissions. Obviously, they've now got the challenge, and it's not an inconsiderable challenge, of going through 900 submissions and summarizing all of those points into themes and issues that they need to take account of, which is not an easy task, as you can imagine, but that is happening at pace at the moment. So we asked them sort of, broad themes of the commissions. Well, firstly, we asked actually, are the submissions going to be made public? And the intention is that they would be made public in future. Obviously, there are some people that have requested that their submissions were not public, and that's fair enough. And it's normal process for IRD to actually, when they're going out to a general consultation like this, to make things public. So that their intention was that will be the case in future. But we asked then in terms of, well, what were the broad themes of the submissions? And, no surprises, things that a lot of us talked about previously in webinars and other papers and things that we put out there. So, firstly, the consultation period at a month was a tad short. And people being a bit annoyed about that, and fair enough too. But at least we got a consultation, so we'll take that as a win. The issues paper didn't sort of show that there was any consultation of Māori in this. The fact that there was no dollar impact analysis was very frustrating, extremely frustrating to me as an accountant, but very frustrating to many people. And I was intrigued with Minister Willis's comment when she did announce the pause. Key point, this is a pause, this is not a stop. So this issue is not dead. This issue is still very live. It is just paused. And I was very intrigued with Minister Willis actually giving us a figure that there was only $50 million worth of tax in this likely, and therefore it's not worth it for this budget. Well, goodness me, we could have saved a lot of time and effort if someone had done the back of the envelope calculations a little bit earlier. But I think if there are changes going forward, I would be very hopeful that we will now get a bit more of a impact analysis coming through with this, because the dollars is a key issue here. There was strong suggestions coming through that the focus should be on problem charities rather than on the whole sector, given that some of this has been conflated in the media with a few charities that perhaps have been behaving badly or people have concerns about, and that actually there are existing tools to deal with charities that are not following the rules or not acting charitably, such as charities services, and therefore existing tools should be used. So really good, strong themes coming through there in terms of, if there is a problem, let's target this to the problem and let's use the existing tools rather than slap a compliance impost over the whole sector. Definitional challenges came through and threshold challenges. Obviously, if you're going to draw a line somewhere, where does that line actually sit? And there's been a lot of discussion about, well, is this going to hit sausage sales, or is this going to hit sanitarium? And that's possibly a sort of a cheap soundbite, isn't it? In terms of either ends of the spectrum, from the very small to the very large. But where does the line actually go if there is going to be a tax? And the IRD policy people were at some pains to point out to us that if this tax on unrelated business income is introduced, then yes, there will be some de minimis level under which it's not an issue and it doesn't matter. But obviously, whenever you get a line, who's just on either side of that line? Do people start gaming it to be on either side of that line and do things, setting up different structures and the like? So definitional challenges and threshold challenges was a key issue that came out of it. The IRD policy team were also noting that there were some interesting suggestions that came through with some of the submissions. So that's great, such as minimum distribution model might be better than a taxing of business income. But they were at pains to point out to us that, they'd only had the broad themes at that stage and they were going through the 900 submissions. So that was a big piece of work for them. We shared with them, I guess, some frustration in terms of some of the media around this. Some of the things that have been in the media have not been helpful. In fact, in a couple of cases have not been factually correct, which is really annoying, such as the fact that, charities need to be more transparent. Well, actually, charities are legally required to be quite transparent at the moment. In fact, more so than the average company in New Zealand is, because of the requirements on the Charities Register. And we do have a regulator as well. So, it's important that information that is out there in the media is actually correct, and a little bit frustrating when things are put out that aren't correct. The $2 billion profit statement that was in the media has been seen as rather unhelpful and simplistic. This number, the difference between the total revenue going into the sector and the total expenditure coming out of the sector in a year, has a whole lot of different things in there, such as some accounting issues, such as unrealized gains on property, university funding, timing issues, errors in the register. The Charities Register is one of the best registers that's out there, but all of the information on it is not perfect. A concern in terms of some unhelpful information out there. Some other misconceptions. There's been a lot of confusion, it would appear, in terms of how broad the reach of any tax change would be. And I think this is something that all of us need to be aware When things are proposed is, are we going to be impacted by that or aren't we going to be impacted by that? I think there's been some people simplistically going, oh, well, it's not me, therefore I don't need to worry about it. But you may need to. Um, There obviously has been the issue around not-for-profit organizations and incorporated societies, and a misconception around those, that they are automatically tax exempt. Unless an incorporated society is also a registered charity, it doesn't have an automatic tax exemption. It has a very small exemption for interest income, but is not automatically tax exempt. And unfortunately, and this was a point the IRD's policy team also noted to us, that there appears to be some professional advisors out there, accountants and lawyers, perpetuating this myth that if you're an incorporated society, you're not subject to income tax. And on the income tax issue of incorporated societies, there is another discussion paper out there at the moment, which Stephen will talk to a little bit later, on the mutuality principle. So I'll pass to you now, Stephen, in terms of other thoughts or comments that came out of the IRD team.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's wonderful to see everybody gathered. One of the reasons I love doing these webinars is simply getting so many people together, because I recognize so many of your names, and there's people here from all across the sector, many different specialties or areas. And I think that's a valuable thing that this has been doing, is actually bringing people together. So in some ways, we've accomplished something today by gathering and hearing perspectives. So I just wanted to step back from the detail. Craig's done a great job of outlining some of the outcomes there and what's happened. And Jenny kind of introduced it really well. There were three things that I wanted to mention, and then we're going to get into a bit more of maybe a banter back and forth on some of the topical things. But the first one I just want to emphasize, Craig, you mentioned this, but there were 900 submissions, and the government actually changed their perspective. And so I don't want us to forget this, because in the next month or two or three, I'm pretty sure, as Craig said, there's going to be another round of consultation. And so I want us to remember the power of submitting and the power of making our voices heard. So taking action actually can lead to change. When I saw that announcement from Nicola Willis, we will not be implementing changes in this budget, it was like, oh, wow, like we had some impact. It was amazing to see. So let's not forget that, because we can have, this is democracy at work. We can actually have a part to play. So I guarantee you there's going to be issues that come up. Let's continue to come together as a sector and submit and make our voices heard. And the reason for this is, something might not affect you today, but oftentimes these things are opening doors. And when doors are open, it's very hard to stop them continuing to be open. So people have said to me quite often, oh, well, unrelated business income, that doesn't affect me because we don't own a business and it's not really related. But then I ask them, well, do you have funds? Have you invested them somewhere? It's not that big a jump from taxing unrelated business income to taxing investments in funds or other places. So it's that creeping door, it could open wider. So that's why it's important that we take action when there's things that we see. And so that's the first point. The second one is coming back to something Craig mentioned. There's almost a fundamental philosophical point which is at play here. And so we need to really understand, why do we allow charities to have the position that they have in society? I get so tired of the narrative coming through, like somehow charities are gaming the system or they're evading tax or something. The whole system is built so that they are enabled to advance charitable purpose to do more good. And I think we need to be reminding people, so we need to be clear on that, so that the conversations we're having in our everyday world, that we're getting it clearly across so that everybody is aware. So continue to come back to the fundamentals. It's not a tax concession that is like getting out of the system. It's actually on purpose. This is good for our society. And the third one is I think that this has been, in some ways, I hope, some kind of a wake-up call to storytelling and how we need to tell the story of the good that we're doing as charities. I think fundamentally charities are humble and they're getting on with the mahi and the work. They're usually frantically busy running on volunteer time. There's an urgent thing that has to be done by tomorrow. But we really need to spend a bit of time telling the story, getting the messages out about the role that charity and organizations that are for purpose are actually playing. Because if that narrative came out instead of the 1 out of 29,000 charities that does something wrong, I think it would change how the public perception was as well. So that's something that we each can take responsibility for. And then also, when you see it done well, if you see somebody talking about what they do, let's not go down the tall poppy syndrome. Let's go, this is amazing. I'm going to share it. I'm going to like it. I'm going to tell somebody else. Like we can support each other across the way. Yeah, so those are just three things. Taking action can have impact. Let's keep the fundamentals in mind when we're talking, and let's continue to work on our storytelling so that the narrative can be a positive one about the role that these organizations play. So a bit philosophical, but hopefully that helps. Back to you, Jenny.
Thanks, Stephen. Before I pass back to Craig, there's an interesting question here that one of you may wish to answer from John, saying, was IR open to a collaborative approach to develop any potential policies?
In my experience, IR is always open to hearing ideas and things. The challenge with I think what John is suggesting there is who's actually in that tent and who's out of that tent. So hence the reason for going out in terms of getting submissions. But I do know that they're very appreciative of suggestions within submissions of things that could work. So yeah, no, it's an interesting point and possibly one for us to put back to IR. But the challenge there, John, is how and who.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a few other questions there I'm collating that we can go back to the end, but maybe, yeah. Craig, maybe you could just comment on the budget and what you think is worth us thinking about as a sector that's come out of the budget.
Thanks, Jenny. Well, just actually, before I do that, just riffing off Stephen very quickly there, I'm always reminded of the fact that we are so fortunate to live in a democracy. This is actually democracy at work. This is people's voices being used and making sure that we get a whole range of opinions and voices out there. So, we have the luxury of living in a democracy. It comes with it sometimes the obligation of making our voices heard. And, not everyone's going to agree with me, not everyone's going to agree with Stephen, whatever the case, but we do need to participate in that. Just before I jump into the budget itself, the next steps, so we were pointed in asking the IRD policy team, so what's next? Where does this go now? Is it over? And I guess we got a little bit of a rude shock that they are currently working hard on trying to go through all of the submissions, and they have been requested to put together an issues paper for the ministers, primarily Ministers Willis and Watts. And the timing of that is likely end of June, mid-July timing. And that will be a issues paper that will look at stop or continue decisions in terms of the areas that the issues paper has thrown up. So the two main areas there being taxing of business income and donor-controlled entities. What they did share with us also was that if the decision is to continue to explore the taxing of business income of charities, then it's likely this will require another public consultation. So that was very heartening to hear. The other item, the main item, the donor-controlled entities one, if the decisions around donor-controlled entities is progressed, then that is much more likely to be a much more specific and targeted consultation because it actually affects a much lesser number of charities. So yeah, a much fewer number of entities there. And the aim would be that any legislation arising out of this would be put forward by Christmas. So just to reiterate the point, folks, this is not a dead issue. This is still a very live issue. And that's the broad timeframes that the good IRD policy team were able to give us. We did specifically request at the end of our meeting, is that actually, are we able to share that? And they said, yes, we were. So that's what we're looking at. So yeah, interesting.
Thank you. Craig, just before you go on, there's a couple of questions and they're scrolling down pretty fast that I thought I might just respond to. One is a question from Gary Stewart. Any suggestion that grants from one charity to another would be taxable? My understanding is not at all, that that's not in scope at all in this. So no need to be concerned about that. And the other question was one from Pauline about the number of organisations represented in the submissions. I think that will be clearer once we get the response from IRD, because they did indicate to us, I think Craig and Stephen, that they were going to be quite transparent about who the submissions had come from, and many of them would be made available.
Yeah, that was the intention that came across when they were talking. I guess there then, what happens in the other side and whether it's released will be something else. Can I just mention one other thing to emphasize is that I know some of those on the call are concerned and are worried, but they did emphasize this de minimis idea or the de minimis threshold. So if you have an op shop or something, you're selling secondhand books or clothes, they don't have that in mind. That's not what they're targeting. And also, I know some of you are from like religious organizations or sports groups or small charities that do receive donations. They're not talking about taxing of donations to charities. So that's not what this is about. This is about unrelated business income primarily. But like I said before, once you open the door, then what else might come walking through? And conceptually, I think those of us here have a problem with the widening in the scope and the confusion that comes from making changes, because you're trying potentially to capture a small number of entities by changing things for 29,000 charities. So that's the fundamental point. But for some of you on this call, I know you probably came worried that it's going to impact me next month, but I take a deep breath, like it's probably not going to impact you, but the overall vibe of the changes does seem to be that there is an opening in it, looking at more tax and what the changes would be. So hopefully it gives you a little bit of comfort as well, though. So yeah.
Thanks. Back to you, Craig.
Well, just to riff off what Stephen's just talked about there, I've always been very concerned about sustainability of charities and financial sustainability. Most charities are reliant on charity in order to exist. The only way that a charity can be sustainable without relying on charity is to actually operate some form of business, some form of social enterprise where it can actually be a master of its own destiny somewhat and control it. And I guess conceptually, I'm very worried about this from the perspective of, well, isn't this essentially going to be a major impediment on the one area where charities can actually be financially sustainable and masters of their own destiny? So there's a number of good questions there that we will pick up on. The budget, just quickly talking about the budget, there was very little in this budget directly related to charities, and if you sort of scoured through some of the reports that came out or the full budget itself, you will have struggled to find much in there. To summarize, budget 2025 was shaped by fiscal restraint with 5.3 billion in savings and reprioritization, largely funding most of the 6.7 billion in new spending. So kind of this was, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul budget. That would be a good description of it. Tragically, a large amount of that reprioritization came from pay equity. about 2.7 billion, I think, which is not a great thing for us. So the question I see out of a fiscal constraint type budget for charities is, will the cuts to existing services, because we've all seen cuts in lots of government ministries or departments that many of us as charities actually deal with and in some cases are funded by, will these cuts actually result in less funding for the sector and more issues for the charitable sector to pick up? So that's a very live issue of any sort of fiscal constraint type budget. The good news, I guess, on a fiscal constraint budget, because we have to look for silver linings, is that it's unlikely to be inflationary. So from an economic point of view, to all the accountants out there, that is positive. If you look through the budget and go, well, who won out of this? And look at it at a simplistic sort of winners and losers type lens, you'd have to say the biggest winners are the business sector, which kind of ties in with this government's rhetoric in terms of we're trying to get a more productive economy to lift everyone's boats. And very much the 20% upfront deduction on new assets is a big advantage for business and should stimulate a lot more investment and hopefully R&D and all those things. The tragedy for charities is that because we don't pay income tax, that 20% deduction is a dead rubber. You couldn't claim it anyway, even if you were operating a business. Other, I guess, interesting things in there in the budget. I was very interested in the social investment funding. So 275 million has been voted for social investment. A quote from the minister, social investment is about the government investing earlier, guided by data and evidence, and with more transparent measurement of the impact that interventions are having in people's lives. That's a really good positive statement. One would hope that government investment was already being invested in that way. But this is trying a different model and giving the Social Investment Agency a more specific control and funding to carry that out. I think, to me, the important implication of that is that for the charity sector, we need to just keep getting better at measuring and communicating our impact, because that's what that Social Investment Agency is looking for. It's looking to fund the best and most impactful interventions of issues that are out there. So, how are we as individual charities looking at measuring our impact, and communicating that? That we've got a requirement to provide a statement of service performance. Some people have seen that as a compliance exercise. Actually, it was designed as a tool to allow charities to really report and sing their impacts from the rooftops. There's an opportunity for us. The only other, I guess, notable thing I saw out of it from a charitable sector perspective was some extra funding for the problem gambling sector, which is great and needed, unfortunately, albeit that half of that funding was coming out of the levy on gambling anyway. So it's kind of just a repurposing of it. And I have to note a personal view as a former auditor of the Problem Gambling Foundation in New Zealand. I didn't know much about it until I got in to be their auditor, and it absolutely horrified me. And I now can't walk past a pub that has a pokies in it without having a almost physical reaction as how horrible they actually are. They're a curse on our community.
Oh.
But there we go. I'll get off my soapbox
Thank
now.
you. Jump off your high horse for a bit.
Yep.
I've just been scanning through the questions. I think a number of the questions that you've asked us, we actually can't answer, but may be answered in the next consultation, because there's a whole lot of questions about whether or not this work goes any further. And if it does, what IR have indicated to us is they will be either doing the targeted or a general consultation. So many of your questions, I think we share the concerns that are implicit in your questions, but we can't answer them at the moment. There was an interesting question, though, from Matt, which was, where does the Minister for the Community and Voluntary Sector stand on this? And I wonder if Craig or Stephen, you might want to comment on that quickly. And then I think we need to move on to the other issues that have arisen, the fringe benefit tax, mutuality, taxing of membership. We've got only 20 minutes to go, but perhaps a quick comment on the Minister.
Well, I'll let Craig comment because you're the one who wrote. Do you want to say what the response was?
So when we were going through the original process and trying to lobby to make sure there was consultation and things for this, I wrote, well, we collectively wrote to all three ministers involved, being Minister Watts, who's the Minister of the Inland Revenue, Minister Willis, Minister of Revenue, and Minister Upston, Minister of the Community and Voluntary Sector, basically just asking what they were doing about this and what they thought about it. We got responses back from Minister Upston's office saying that this is a inland revenue issue, therefore it's not us, and we see that you've written to that minister, so you won't be hearing from us. Which I must admit I found curious. I'll leave it at that.
And just before I chuck the ball back to you, Alan just asked, has IR indicated how a targeted consultation would be focused and who would be eligible to submit or contribute? The answer is no, not yet. Yeah. But obviously when it becomes public, we'll know. So
I think it's worth pointing out that our discussion with IR was very much at a broad level, and we're very appreciative of them even having a discussion with us. And sharing this level of information with it. So it is just a general
at the moment. Okay. So Craig, I mean, we're going to kick off with you exploring some of the other issues that have come up other than donor advised funds and the taxation of business related activities.
Sure. Craig, if you want, I could do the mutuals one because I know that was on our list, because I know that way you can scan the questions as well.
Okay, thank you.
So just so everyone knows, in the chat, I put a link to this other consultation, and I think there is a major danger here of consultation fatigue. I don't know how all of you feel, but we finished all those submissions, and then, there's one about FBT separate to the other consultation, and then, here's one about mutuals. So I put a link to that one in the chat. And so this is a consultation looking at mutuals and who might it affect. It's likely to affect groups that are member-based, essentially. So there's estimates that could be between 6,000 and 10,000 societies. And I want to give a quick shout out to Grant Thornton, who did a summary of some of the key things. I'll put that in the chat in a second. And I know some of you are online as well. But one of the key things is that the IRD has said in this consultation paper that they view membership fees such as subscriptions as likely to become taxable income. So that's quite a big shift, and it could cause issues for these sorts of groups which have operated in a different way before. So if you are from a mutual or if you have members, then this is something that I think you should be looking at. The consultation finishes on the 25th of June, so we've got about a month left to review and submit. And I'm just putting in the chat right now the paper that I mentioned. So have a look at that, but we wanted to make sure that that's on your radar as well. And then I'll pass it to you, Craig, for another insight into some other things.
Thanks, Stephen. FBT, that's an issue that is of great interest to some charities and no interest at all to others. So currently, charities are not subject to fringe benefit tax, which can be quite a significant advantage in terms of attracting and retaining employees. And some charities have a significant amount of FBT benefit, I guess you would say. The provision of vehicles is a common thing that a business has to pay for through FBT, whereas charity doesn't. So there was questions in terms of, well, what about FBT? So the IRD team told us that they got quite a bit of feedback on the submissions on FBT, especially from some of the people running charities that are significantly advantaged by this FBT benefit that currently exists. There's also been a FBT simplifications paper consultation happening as well. I'm not sure if it's still open or not, but it was specifically also called out in the budget in that the government is trying to simplify some FBT issues for business. The FBT simplification paper, issues paper, specifically had a line in it that there was nothing in there being asked about charities because that had already been covered in the charities issues paper. So the Inland Revenue Department has got some feedback on FBT from the issues paper on charities, and they'll be considering that as part of their overall consideration of all the feedback they got on the taxing of charities piece. So it's still up in the air in terms of what happens with fringe benefit tax for charities and whether that exemption remains.
Great. Any other comments, Stephen, on any of those other issues?
No, that's a good summary. I guess there's a theme in these questions, as you've identified, Ginny, is that we just don't know the answer to some of them. Some people are pointing out what would the definition be of unrelated business income, and these things. That's hopefully what the consultation would allow us to provide input on. But yeah, it is kind of a wait and see. We had all that energy around, we've got to get submissions in by the end of March. And now we're going to have to wait again to see what's the specific scope here. Yeah, I do take comfort from some of like the inland revenue people that I talked to, that we had these calls with. They're really good people. They're doing the best that they can. And one of the things is that their paper even had identified that it wasn't competition that was driving their focus on tax changes, which up until that, I think everyone had assumed, oh, it's because of the competition argument that somehow charities that don't pay business tax are competing with non-charity businesses. But the paper was really clear saying that isn't what we are focused on at all. So I think there's some positives from even those sorts of papers and the approach that people are taking. So yeah.
It's a good call out on the competition piece, Stephen, although, frustratingly, it seems to be the first thing that gets pulled up in the media each time, that somehow there's this big unfair advantage, which there is no proof of anywhere. But there we go.
Yeah, well, philosophically, I mean, Craig, we can have a bit of a chat about this, but I think we can agree that there's probably 10 or 15 or 20, say, companies that are actually on their radar, like the 50 million they're talking about. It's the vast majority of charities would be lucky to make a profit from these things in any event. And so actually, if we could strip back the politics of it all, maybe it would be about, let's look at these individual situations and can we somehow have change for that, rather than broad brush stroke that affects all 29,000 charities. But it's a difficult thing, you can't just make rules for this and that. So yeah.
Yeah, and you pick up there, Stephen, on the point of unintended consequences and compliance cost if something is applied to the whole population. There was a comment early on in the comments from someone about, some more information and transparency would be desirable from some charities.
Yeah.
And I think, that's a fair comment at one level, but we also have to ensure that we get a balance here. As a former auditor, as someone who's helped charities prepare financial statements, one of the biggest gripes is there's all this compliance that we have to do. So, we need to get a balance between what's an appropriate level of public transparency versus what is the compliance cost or the tickets to the game, if you like, of getting the benefits of being a charity. And that only comes through having a good discussion.
Fundamentally, and this is where we have our little banter, is that the focus on charities as being the primary where we might generate some income and we might actually solve our budget problems. Like, it just conceptually grates, because at the same time, let's make it easier for business. Let's reduce tax over here. And it really does feel like, the wealthy will look after them. The organizations that are helping the poorest, we're going to tighten things up over here. So it's a fundamental clash of approach, if you like.
Thank you. I mean, I think the comment, though, that we made in our meetings with IR, and I'm sure other people have made them in their submissions, is where there are organisations who are clearly abusing the current provisions, all power to the elbow of the Charities Registration Board or whoever to make sure those people are complying with the parameters under which the sector operates. I mean, none of us are defending bad behaviour. I think the question is, from my understanding, there's actually relatively little evidence of it in the sector. And I think the bigger concern that we all have is that measures that some people ask for would end up impacting so widely across the sector. I do think this is a political issue. One of you mentioned the P word. And it's important, I think, if you're talking to ministers, if you're talking to Upston, if you're talking to your local MP, raise this issue so that there is an understanding at a political level about how important it is, including with the opposition. If you're meeting with the opposition, I know Philanthropy New Zealand has got a meeting with the Greens in Auckland shortly. I mean, I think it's important that these issues are discussed with politicians so they understand, because I do think the sector is not well understood in terms of both what is delivered and at what cost. Somebody raised a point in the chat about the number of volunteers. So there's all of the unpaid, unquantified labour that goes into so many of our organisations, and I'm sure many of you sitting around on this call will be thinking exactly that. So I do think that's important. I remember when the Charities Commission was disestablished some years ago now. I think it was when John Key was Prime Minister, and the ministers of the day had been assured that it would be no issue, that no one would care. And in fact, the what I heard anecdotally was that numbers of MPs had people coming to their constituency offices expressing concern about that closure. So there was a bit of a lesson, I think, for that particular government at the time about actually how important this sector is. So I do think it's incumbent on all of us, when we get the opportunity, to make sure that politicians of whatever stripe understand what the sector offers, and also the constraints under which we already operate.
Yeah, I totally agree. And can I pick up on one thing from that, which is completely different, of course, but it did start with what you're saying. Because in the chat, some people have said the 900 submissions. I wonder how many of those are groups that then in turn represent 200 or 500 or other groups. And I just wanted to emphasize something that we've said is we need to have more collaboration across groups. And I'm confident that those 900 submissions, if you were to break it down, it would actually represent potentially thousands of organizations, and in turn, hundreds of thousands of people who, ultimately are impacted. But my point is that I recognize, like, I work as a lawyer, so I know some of you on this call, and I know that you are involved in what you're doing. And I want to encourage you to lift your eyes up to see what other organizations are doing similar work to you, and then come together to be able to make submissions or work together instead of continually, if we have this fiefdom mentality of, well, we're the lone wolf out here, we're doing the work, like, we need to come together, collaborate, and then tell a story that will be helpful. We're lucky in Aotearoa that we do have some peak bodies, and I recognize some of them on this call. Platform is an amazing one, Volunteering New Zealand, Hui, Philanthropy New Zealand. Like, there's a long list. I'm not going to try to say everyone, but also there's some charities on this call who are not connected in with peak bodies. But I think if we were to come together and collaborate and make submissions and, for example, advocating for mental health funding, what would that look like if you went as a united part of that sector and said, we represent 500 organizations, which in turn means there's 100,000 people that we support. Like, let's try not to just operate in our own worlds. I know it's easy to do that, but hopefully this sort of a call helps us to realize that we're all in it together as well.
The last
Thanks.
stats are that there's 1.4 million volunteer hours a week provided by the charitable sector. So
Thank
well
you.
done, folks.
Yeah. There's a lot more questions coming through the chat that we're not going to have time to answer, but certainly issues like interest on investments is not in scope for this. So I think there's still obviously quite a lot of concern out there about these kind of issues that we hope we might get some answers from. Craig.
Can I just make a comment on that? Because this, to me, comes back to the policy underpinnings of this. I don't understand how active business income is that different from passive business income. If I'm a charity and I've got $100, I can invest it in some shares, or I can invest it in some sausages and sell the sausages and try and make some money that way.
Right.
I'm intending to try and make money in both cases. So where's the policy conceptual difference to that? Which is a struggle. And someone's made a really good comment in the comments here. I know this is a simplistic view, but the issue shouldn't be about how they generate funds. It should be on how they spend the money. And thank you, Stephen, because that is exactly how our charities law taxation system exists at the moment, albeit that this looks like an attack at that very simple, quite elegant way of dealing with charities. First, you have to be accepted as a charity. You are regulated as a charity. You have obligations to report as a charity. And the issue is, are you continuing to use your funds on delivering on your charitable purpose? It's not about where your funds are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
This issue puts a direct wedge into that and changes it. And we lose the elegance, the simplicity, the underlying policy rationale of that.
Thank you. We've only got about another 5 minutes to go. At the end of this, Stephen is going to invite you all to stay online. So do you want to talk about that now? And then I'm going to ask each of you for your summary comments. But Stephen.
Yeah, just briefly, I know there's going to be a lot of people who have to go at 1 o'clock to another meeting, or they have to rush to something else. But if you have time and you would like to stay, I wrote a little story called The Apple Tree, which is this here. It's a picture book, but it's actually for the adults who read it. So I'd love to read it for anybody who has a spare 5 minutes at the end, and hopefully you'll get something from it. It's something I just like to do, so it's an offer.
Thank you. You opened with Isaac, and you're going to close with a story. I like that. Okay, so
can I just comment that Stephen's story is a really good indicator of the sector, because this sector has been around for a long time. It will continue to be around for a long time. Governments of all colors and shapes and sizes will come and go, but this sector is needed for the glue, the cultural glue of this fabulous country that we live in. We just need to remember that, yep, there's always going to be hard bits and bumps in the road, but let's keep working through this.
Thank you. Are those your closing comments, Craig, or do you have others you wish to make?
Oh, well, I'll make another quick one if I'm allowed.
Yeah.
Someone was reaching out to me the other night, and they were telling me how nervous and desperate they were feeling about this. I think they were right to feel nervous, but not desperate or despairing. And, this sector has strength. This sector has some fabulous people and organizations doing fabulous mahi. That's needed. There will always be changes, some of which we can control, some of which we can't control, some of which we can influence, some of which we can't influence. Control what you can control, put your energies there, and put your best foot forward. But stay positive on this.
Great. Thank you. Stephen.
Thank you. I hope we get to hear your final thoughts as well. I would just, for some of you who may not have seen it, we did do this paper, the examining the foundations of why we empower charities to have positive impact. So if you haven't had a look, it's pretty fast read. I just encourage you to make sure you get that, because it gets more to the philosophical side of things, like what is the position? Why do we allow charities the role that they have in our society? So I think that's good to say. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that charities, we have to always be organic and ready to move with what is available, the materials that we have to build with. And so one of the things that may interest some of you is thinking about funding streams and income, because there's other ways to think beyond the Oliver Twist approach of, please, can I have some more, which is that sort of older mentality of charity must be dependent on donations. And I know it flies in the face of, but there might be tax. But many charities, and I'm helping a lot of them, are thinking about what's our purpose? what could we use as a business model to advance our purpose and also get profitable income streams. So a church that sets up a funeral business, meeting the needs of people in their society, a charity that sets up a cafe that employs people who are recovering from drug addictions. I don't think those things would be in the scope of the unrelated business income because the advancing of the purpose is actually being done through the business. So this might be challenging for some of you, but I want to encourage you to think beyond the traditional charity mindset of, uh, please, here's my bowl, give me some money, and start to think a bit wider. Impact investing is a term that you should explore if you haven't yet, because that's another way to potentially partner with people and work out, is there something that we could get investment for that would advance our purpose as well? And then the final thing is just a reminder that the Charities Act has changed. So many of you have documents that were founding documents that were drafted in 1974 or even earlier, 1952. So the Charities Act now requires you to be updating your rules and your constitutions. So just bear that in mind. It only came in last year. So we've been putting out a lot of guides. This is an example of one, a charities health check. So charities can go through this and think about what are our policies, what are our documents. And yeah, we're just helping hundreds of charities to go through that process. So guess what? It's not just tax and charities we have to be worried about. There's other things we have to keep on our radar as well.
Thank you. A final closing note from me, then I'm going to hand back to Stephen. But I mean, someone's just called Stephen, Craig, and I the Three Musketeers. We're certainly not an organisation, but there are lots of peak organisations. I know Philanthropy New Zealand was on the call earlier. I think it's really important that that you go back to your peak organisation and or join one if that's closest to your purpose, so that the voice of the sector is heard in a coordinated way. I mean, I was kind of encouraged in a way that the fact that we did put in 900 submissions collectively, probably representing many, many more hundreds of organisations. Someone made the point that Rotary's submission was on behalf of 200 organisations. So you can the multiplier becomes obvious. So I think it's really important that we submit both as individuals, but also empower our peak bodies to voice the issues on behalf of wherever we sit in the sector. And if you want to know more about the current social investment agency, there's a really good watch if you watch Jack Tame talking to Andy Costa, where Jack asks Andy some quite hard questions about the social investment agency. So that's an easy enough to find reference point that just gives you a sense of where that's going, and that's something we all certainly need to keep an eye on. So I think on that basis, I'm going to sign off, hand you back to Stephen. Are you planning to close with karakia, or is the book in lieu of karakia?
The book will be kind of a karakia. The people who haven't heard it yet will understand when I get to the end.
Okay.
And can I just say as well, this has been recorded. So when I send an email out, it will have a link to the video and the audio. And so please share it. Please help us to get the word out to others who couldn't make it. Hit forward to boards that you're on and anyone else. Craig, you have your hand up.
Just very quickly, we tend to use LinkedIn a fair bit in terms of sharing, and there's been some fabulous discussions on these issues on LinkedIn. So if you're not already there, feel free to link in with us, and we'll continue to try and use that as a medium for sharing information and updates as well.
And I'm sure we'll come back once we know what the outcome of the discussions is in June or July. And we'll all be here again talking the issues through and talking through what the implications are.
Yeah, and in the end of June, I'm going to be chatting with Shamabil Yaqub, the economist. So that's kind of a flow on from this, because I'm going to be grilling him on the economy, and we'll definitely be having a charitable lens on that discussion. It'll be a broad-ranging one, though. Whenever I talk to him, we end up going all over the place. So Well, I just want to say thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Craig, for your time and effort as well. And feel free to drop off, but I'm going to read this little story now. It should take about 5 minutes, but I totally understand you've got lots of commitments. It's called The Apple Tree. And what I'd like for those of you who are staying, what I'd like you to do is imagine a green valley. So this is probably somewhere in your childhood, or you've been on a walk and there's a little mountain and it comes down and there's a stream running through the middle of it. So that's what I want you to have in your mind. And then I want you to put aside airplane noises and car noises and anything else because there's no other sound. There's just birds and the stream. Some people tell me that they find it helpful to just listen to my voice as I read this, because it's a little bit like a meditation. So feel free to do that. And I will read it. There's 4 parts to it. And I want you to think about who is the apple tree in your life as I'm reading it. So thanks everybody for joining. And this is our unusual form of closing. Part 1, Spring. I remember the small boy who used to visit me in the summer. He planted me here one day with his grandmother. They were exploring and they ended up in this small valley so far out of the way. I overheard the grandmother say that she had come to this same spot with her own grandparents many years before. They planted me beside this slow-moving stream that drifts lazily by, tossing light back up into my branches like confetti. I've long ago given up trying to work out what there might be to celebrate here, for the stream itself babbles constantly, but it can't hold much of a conversation. It speaks over and over of rocks and sand, of fish and frogs, and eddies and flows. But I'm grateful for the stream, for my roots found it long ago, and much of the surrounding land is parched in the summer. If I hadn't been laid down so carefully to grow on its banks, I might have withered long ago. Let's see what happens, the grandmother said slowly. Through the soil that they placed on me, I heard their footsteps retreating. Part 2, Summer. I can't tell you much about the next few years as I emerged from seed to leaf to small tree. The boy returned during the summer and pruned me as I grew larger. He would often just sit there beside me or lean against me as I grew. Only a few times did his grandmother join him, and I watched as she grew older more quickly than the boy and I grew up. They had long talks there sitting beneath me, and I listened in to each one. They talked of the past, the present, the future. I recall the final time I saw the grandmother as she struggled to her feet, leaning on a walking stick after sitting down under my shade. When the boy came the next summer, he was even more reflective than he had been on earlier visits, and he sat there, just watching the water flow by. He was thinking and throwing small stones, listening to their sound, being still and silent. The last time I saw the boy, he had grown into a man. I was proud because I'd started to produce some apples, and I saw him grab one and eat it. Then I noticed that he had in his hands an axe, and I shivered as he drew even closer and raised it. He used it to hack at me, and after several deep cuts, he took off the branch that was growing out and away from the stream. He had shifted my angles, and this left me only to droop out over the water. I felt like he had cut off an arm, and I resented it. The apples that had been on the branch lay scattered on the ground. Even then, I knew that this was going to determine my destiny in some way. The man cut away at the branch lying there unattached and yet so intimately connected to me, until he had fashioned the straightest part into a walking stick. Was that all I was useful for? I felt a great betrayal, yet before he left, he stood up before me, and the wind went quiet, the birds in my branches stopped singing, and the sun shone brighter. I take a piece of you to guide me, he said. He addressed me so formally that despite my indignity, I bowed to him as best I could. Then he was gone to live his life, leaving me alone. Part 3, Autumn. As time went by, the seasons were my only companions. They stayed long enough to feel comfortable with each other, not like the small birds that flew in and out so quickly that I couldn't even focus on them. In the winters, the snow that fell chilled me deeply, but the serene silence that resulted was worth it. Spring saw me grow again and push out new blossoms, each one representing a possible future. In the summers, my apples grew and grew larger in the sun. I was proud of them, and as the days shortened, they fell from me. I was most upset in the autumns, for by taking part of me away, the man had left only one place for the apples I produced to fall. The stream gratefully received each of them, making a sound as they slipped into the water like divers. All I could do was watch them drift away downstream and around the bend. It made me sad to see them leave. At that time of year, I resented the man greatly. Although as a boy he had given me life and looked after me, he had also destroyed my chances for a friend, since no tree could grow there with me. For all those possible companions were swept downstream to nothingness. I kept asking myself why this had happened to me. Part 4, Winter. The years rolled by, and each year my resentment grew with my height. My bark had become knobbled and rough. I was old now. Yet still I produced fruit each season, hoping that one day they might land beside me and grow there. I towered high above the stream, but my wish was not granted. The apples dropped each time into the water to float away. I could feel a coldness within myself, and the dark began to take over as I questioned all I stood for and reflected often on how I had achieved nothing. Then one day an old man came walking into the valley with a small girl. Something stirred in me as they drew near, a memory of long ago. It had been several decades since I had last seen a person in these parts. This man reminded me of the grandmother who had helped plant me, for he walked slowly yet purposefully. They sat under my branches with their backs against my trunk and watched the water. I listened to them talk of the past, the present, the future. Then the little girl asked, "Is this really the source of them all, grandfather?" The old man nodded. "Yes," he replied, "and the thing is that this old tree probably doesn't even know." He smiled wistfully. "What do you mean?" asked the little girl. I too leaned in closer, listening hard. "Well, look at the bend over there," he said. "You see, this tree has no way of looking beyond this valley, of seeing past its own limited view. It has no way of knowing that for miles and miles down from here, the stream is lined with apple trees, and they have all come from this one source. For years, the tree has been faithfully dropping its apples into the stream, and the water has washed them up to places far beyond the realm of what this tree could have ever thought possible." They were quiet then, and I was too, as I reflected on what was said. This brief conversation had opened a new perspective and healed something within. They had brought lunch with them, and when they were done, the small girl dug 2 holes along the bank, one upstream from me and one a little way down. I saw her place something in them and cover them up. Then she came back to sit beside her grandfather, who said slowly, "Let's see what happens." As they got up to leave, I saw the old man struggling to stand. The girl reached out to help, and she handed him something, and I recognized the walking stick. I made my leaves move in the wind, and I bent closer as the years of resentment fell away. I smiled down at the boy who had planted me so many years before. He also looked up at me, and he tipped his hat. Then he took his granddaughter's hand in his, and I watched them walk away. So that's the end of the story of the apple tree, and I will leave you with 2 questions. The first is, who has been like that apple tree in your life, planting seeds that maybe they don't even know what resulted? And when did you last go and thank them? What would it take to get your phone and text somebody right now and say, "I really appreciate all you've done for our community, for our sports group, for our religious group," whatever it is. We save too many of our thank yous for funerals. We should tell the people while they're with us the impact that they had on our lives. And I know each of you will have somebody like that they would appreciate being told. The second question is, of course, what does it mean for you to be planting seeds? Because each of you are like apple trees. what you're doing, particularly in this sector, the mahi, the planting of seeds that you're doing, you will not see the result tomorrow or next month. You may not see it for 10 years. You may never see the impact directly, but it's important to do it. Like the apple tree was not aware that these trees had been growing. So that's my encouragement. I intended as an encouraging story, instead of saying, keep up the great work, I'll give you a metaphor or a parable or a picture that I hope will resonate with you and you can take it with you. Rod Oram was a reporter who did a lot of writing, and this story was mentioned in his funeral because apparently a few months before he passed, he had felt discouraged that what impact have I had? All these articles, but has it been for anything? And somebody had read this story and mentioned it to him and said, Rod, you've been like an apple tree. The seeds that you've planted have impacted so many. So please take it as an encouragement. Go tell somebody the role they've had in your life, but also keep that perspective on your own marathon, that what you're doing matters, even if you can't see the results right away. Thanks everyone for indulging me in listening to this story. I hope that it was of interest, and we will send the link around. I'll put in the email a bit about the story so that you can find out more if you're interested. And we'd love to keep the conversations going. I can almost guarantee we'll have another webinar at some point this year. So be watching out, and we will love to keep in touch with you all. Thanks everyone, and have a good rest of your days. Ka kite anō.